Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is Mexico Centered, a podcast from the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. After the United States and Canada, China, South Korea, and Japan represent some of Mexico's largest trading partners. While not figuring as prominently in public discourse as NAFTA and the renegotiation process, the economic ties between Mexico and East Asia are important not only in terms of imports and exports, but also in regard to foreign investment. Amidst the uncertainty of the NAFTA renegotiations, some scholars in Mexico argued that Mexico should focus on East Asia regardless of the result of said renegotiations. How important is the economic relationship between Mexico and these three East Asian countries? Who stands to benefit in these partnerships? And does the new trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada affect Mexico's relationship with East Asia? I sat down with José Luis León-Manríquez to answer this and other questions. José Luis León-Manríquez is a professor of International and East Asian Studies at the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico City. He was member of the Mexican Foreign Service for 14 years and served as Deputy Director of the Diplomatic Academy in the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Here's our conversation. José Luis León-Manríquez, thank you for talking to me for Mexico Centered.
It's my pleasure to join you here at the Baker Institute.
So let's talk about Mexico and Asia, but first, before we get to this more specific relationship, can you tell us in a broader perspective the trade relations that exist between Latin America and Asia? What is the importance of these relations? How big are they? How significant are they?
Yes. I think we have to see recent history to address your question. Until late 1990s, trade between East Asia and Latin America was virtually non-existent. In 1998, trade amounted only to $21 billion US, and China was the trading partner number 16 or 32 or 9 of most of Latin American countries. Now the amount is the forecast of the trade between Mexico and Latin America on the one hand and East Asia on the other hand is 750 US billion for 2020. So it's an exponential growth. And most of this growth can be accounted to China, which has become, as I said before, the first, second, or third trading partner of each and every one of Latin American countries.
And so East Asia, we are referring to what country specifically?
Japan, South Korea, in some respects Taiwan, which has a very active involvement in Latin American economics, and of course the People's Republic of China.
Mainly China, right? As you said, that this tends to be the largest in this sector.
In terms of trade, in terms of investment, Japan is still the leading country.
So there's different ways in which this transitions happen. Trade is one. On the other hand, there's investment and companies coming to Latin American countries.
Yeah, and we can talk about both trends,
Right. So if we come to Mexico, what is happening here? Who is in which ways is China important to Mexico? In which ways is Korea, for instance, important to Mexico?
Yeah, I think there are two different issues there. On the one hand, the relation with China, and the other one, relation of Mexico with Japan and Korea. It's completely different. In the case of Mexico, most of the relation with China has to do with trade, with direct trade. So there is a huge deficit in Mexican trade with China. In last year, in 2017, Mexico exported about $5 billion US to China and imported more than 60 billion So there is a complete uneven trade, which has created a lot of complaints in Mexico regarding this unbalanced trade with China. Most of Mexican imports from China are consumer goods, which are very cheap and fulfill the demand of poorest Mexican population. And most of this trade of these Mexican imports from China are made of manufacturers. So if you go to Mexico, you will see a lot of stores that sell products made in China for $1 or less. So that's very convenient for the groups of with lower income in Mexico, and this has brought a lot of complaints from Mexican industry in two respects. The first one is that imports from China are making bankrupt many Mexican industries. Like shoes or toys or textiles. And the other complaint is that the increasing competitiveness of Chinese exports is reducing the penetration of Mexican manufacturers in the U.S. market. So these are the two most usual complaints that you can listen to in Mexico regarding the trade deficit with China.
And on the other hand, you said there's this relationship with Korea and Japan.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah, that's a completely different. Back in the early 1990s, when NAFTA was under negotiation, both Japanese and Korean firms decided to invest in Mexico. By that time, there was a lot of complaint about trade deficit of the United States vis-a-vis Japan and Korea. So what these Japanese and Korean firms was to circumvent protectionist measures from the United States and invest in Mexico so that they could take advantage of easy and speedy access of Mexican of products made in Mexico under the new rules of NAFTA. So I always say that Japan and Korea, and to a lesser extent China, are some of the fourth partners of NAFTA.
And so now when we come to this past 2 years where, to place it in the context of NAFTA, that involves the other very important trading partners with Mexico. So for this past couple of years, we weren't sure whether there was going to be a NAFTA. It seemed like at the end, the United States government would negotiate bilateral agreements with both Mexico and Canada. But finally, on September 30th, we heard that there is a new NAFTA. There is a new deal, a trilateral deal. And so before, though, you and other researchers said that it was important for Mexico, regardless of what happened with NAFTA, to focus on their relations with East Asia, with these three countries. So how does Mexico benefit from these relations? And especially if we think about the high dependence on U.S. trade that Mexico has.
Yeah. I mean, there has been a very interesting process of involuntary diversification in Mexican foreign trade. When NAFTA when NAFTA took into effect back in 1994, I think about 70% of Mexican exports came to the United States, and at some point the percentage came up to 88%, and now it's about 80%. Which means a lot of dependence of Mexico in the U.S. market. And conversely, the imports from the United States decreased gradually after NAFTA. So these imports were in the order of 70%. Now they are in the order of 50%. So most of new imports of this change of the import of structure of Mexican economy come from East Asia. And as I said before, they have to do with the maquiladora industry, which is aimed at the U.S. market. So in some sense, we cannot... it's very difficult to differentiate the relation of Mexico and North America and the relation of Mexico with East Asia. There is a sort of triangle in terms of industrial, of trade, investment, production, and exports to the United States.
So now that we know there's new NAFTA, does that change the relations that Mexico will have with East Asia?
I think it will. It will have like very important impacts upon this relation, and it has to do with which is, I think, the main point of the renegotiation of NAFTA, that has to do with the rules of origin. The rules of origin is the regional content that a manufacturer has to do in order to fulfill the requirements of NAFTA. So the rules of origins were of 62.5% in the first NAFTA, and now are 75%. And that provision is made precisely to avoid that Asian countries, Asian firms, get so much benefit of NAFTA. So the expectation of the Trump administration is that this local content of Mexican exports can be fulfilled by American companies which go to Mexico, assemble their products there, and maybe re-export into Mexico. So that, I think that's the expectation, and it remains to be seen whether this decision will decrease East Asian FDI, especially Korean and Japanese FDI. I would say that there are good chances that this East Asian investment in Mexico will decrease if these provisions of NAFTA are enforced as they should be.
Because as you said, a lot of the interest, perhaps, of these East Asian countries in coming to Mexico or being in Mexico is to kind of get then into the U.S. market,
yes,
or satisfy that demand that exists in the U.S. market.
Yes.
But do it through Mexico because of NAFTA. But now that those change, then we'll see an interaction with this and the...
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, this is their interest, taking Mexico as platform to export to the United States. But Mexico is still a very important market. Mexico has more than 100 million people. And probably East Asian companies will stay in Mexico, moving a bit from their desire to export to the United States to a strategy to take advantage of local markets. So the new Mexican government, led by Andrés Manuel López Obrador, probably will try to increase minimal wages, which will strengthen the purchasing power of Mexican population. And so these automobiles and these flat screens and electronic products that are currently produced in Mexican plants in Mexico probably will be sold in the Mexican market. So if that's the case, we won't expect a sharp decrease of East Asian investments in Mexico.
So given the amount of trade or economic relations that exist between Mexico and these three East Asian countries, and I was looking at some figures. I mean, after the U.S. and Canada, these three countries are basically the most important trading partners for Mexico, and so given this, is it strange that there are no existing trade agreements between Mexico and China and Mexico and South Korea? There is now a trade agreement that includes both Japan and Mexico with CPTPP, which it's a mouthful, but it's what it was known before as the TPP.
Yeah.
Right. So, what accounts for this? That is they're trading a lot, but there's no agreement of any sort.
I think it's very interesting to underline the fact that the increase of trade between East Asia and Latin America came before any FTA, any free trade agreement. So I think that FTAs between East Asia and Latin America have been negotiated after the boom of trade in the early 2000s. This is much the case of Mexico. I mean, China became the second largest Mexican trading partner after the United States, and we don't have a free trade agreement. And we signed a free trade agreement with Japan in 2003. But it hasn't changed too much, the profile and the structure of Mexican-Japanese trade. Is mostly, as I said before, this exchange of industrial inputs for commodities or for light manufacture. So that basically remains the same, despite the FTA. Even, in one of the most contentious areas during the negotiation of Mexico-Japan FTA had to do with the agricultural sector, with the access of Mexican products to Japan. And so in the negotiation, both governments established some quotas for Mexican products. But some of them haven't been fulfilled by Mexican exporters. So one area of opportunity for Mexican exports in both Japan and Korea and even in China could be the agricultural sector, right? But most of Mexican producers are oriented towards the U.S. market. So there are no meaningful incentives to diversify to Asia, because for a Mexican agriculture, it's easier to take advantage of the huge U.S. market, right, rather than to learn how to trade with Asia and to learn probably about another culture or learn the know-how to export. So the U.S. market is here, and so despite having this FTA with Japan, there are not being meaningful increases of Mexican agricultural exports to Japan. And in the case of Korea, there has been a very complex negotiation between Mexico and Korea. There have been different attempts of establishing an FTA between both countries, but in this case there have been some protectionist pressures in Mexico from the steel sector and also from the automobile sector. These sectors don't want more competence from Korean firms in Mexico, and so despite several attempts of Korean government, there has no been a way to negotiate FTA between Korea and Mexico, which is somehow contradictory with the Mexican trade policy, foreign trade policy, which was very active in signing different FTAs. Mm-hmm. So some people in Mexico ask why Mexico has to sign FTA deals with anyone except with Korea. And so the answer is because there are some protectionist pressures inside Mexico that don't want an agreement with Korea.
So now looking a little bit ahead, and on December 1st, the López Obrador administration will take office, and now that there's a renegotiated NAFTA in place, do we expect to see any changes in this relationships with the East Asia region? López Obrador has expressed some protectionist views of the Mexican market, especially when talking about the dependency that Mexico has on trade relations with the U.S.
Yeah.
But I wonder if these views kind of have an impact for what can happen with perhaps strengthening partnerships with China, Japan, and Korea, or whether we don't have any idea whether they're actually thinking about this.
What is striking to me is that despite China, Japan, and Korea are the main Mexican trading partners of after the United States, there was no meaningful discussion during the campaigns about the Asian factor. And not even, not López Obrador, not the panista candidate, Ricardo Anaya, and probably at some point José Antonio Meade, the candidate of PRI, said something about Asia, but it was not an issue in the political campaign. I think that López Obrador will have a more nationalistic orientation. I think he knows that NAFTA will not have the same impact and the same opportunities that it gave to Mexico back in the 1990s. But on the other hand, he is not completely aware of the possibilities of trade and investment with East Asia. As far as I can see. His prospective Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard, studied international affairs, and so he must know that Asia is important to Mexico. But as far as I can see, there is no specific Asian policy from the new Mexican government. There is no an acknowledgement that Asia is becoming more and more important. There is no the discourse of Asia as a possibility of diversification for Mexico, which is a discourse that you will find or that you find in many South American countries, in Argentina or Brazil or Chile. Always say East Asia is very important because it allows us to diversify our exports. And actually they've done so. But you don't find that in Mexico. You could find before, 6 years ago, a discourse in Mexico that saw East Asia as a threat for Mexican economy because these huge trade deficits. Right. And President Enrique Peña Nieto tried to amend the situation, especially with China, but he wasn't able to do so. So I would say wherever López Obrador decides, I think that markets will be very important in East Asia-Mexico relations. And as far as companies think that it's in their interest to keep on investing in Mexico, they will do it. But they will do it because of their own interest, because of market trends, rather than because of an special Mexican policy to reduce deficit or to improve East Asian investments.
As they have been doing until now.
Yeah, it's been very spontaneous. I think it's an example of how free markets find their own way at some point, regardless what the state wants or how the state wants to regulate trade or investment.
Well, José Luis León-Manríquez, thank you so much for answering this question.
It's been my pleasure.
That was José Luis León-Manríquez. The Mexico Center is celebrating its 5th year of producing research, activities, and policy recommendations to help foster a secure and prosperous U.S.-Mexico relationship. You can find a link to our latest newsletter on our website to see an overview of our accomplishments during these 5 years, as well as the latest information on the Center's activities. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Mexico Centered. Thanks to Luisa Huacata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications and the 5th anniversary special edition of our newsletter. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host, and do not necessarily reflect those of the Mexico Center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at mexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and Radio Public. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.